But let's refresh our minds on this story. And this is another one of the Elohist stories, and it's a very important passage, especially for the Jewish people and the Hebrew faith. But it's somewhat disturbing and confusing as well. After these things, the things are the weaning of Isaac and the sending Hagar and Ishmael away, and then the completion of the story of Abimelech and these covenants that Abraham makes with him. And then after those things, God tested Abraham. And he said to him, Abraham. And Abraham said, Here I am. And God said, Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will show you. Now this Moriah place is a place, they're not sure exactly where it is. They think that the name Moriah has been picked up from another passage and has been inserted later here that would locate it and try to identify this place with Jerusalem. So to try to give it a very ancient history and tie to a significant part of the story of the people of Israel. But it's confusing because there isn't a place still existing there. And but anyway, it's 3 days away from Beersheba, they say, so somewhere in that area. But anyway, so Abraham, go to Moriah, offer him there, one of the mountains that I shall show you. And then it ties those words where God finds him in the Ur of the Chaldeans and say, Go to a place where I will show you, and lifts that up again and is making that that tie, so that those who are used to listening but not reading text, when they hear a familiar word or phrase, it's supposed to go, bong, I'm supposed to pay attention. That has significance. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. He cut the wood for the burnt offering and set out and went to the place in the distance that God had shown him. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and he saw the place far away. It doesn't say God told him, here it is, but he saw the place. And this is part of the Elohist, has a lot of parts of making us either assume or think that there's an inter-dynamic going on within the characters. So in looking up and he recognizes it, that's an inner process of recognition or revelation. Anyway, he saw the place far away, and then Abraham said to his young men, the 2 that went with him, Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. Now, those words are, obviously, he's not fully dealing with the reality of why he's going and not making it public. This is to try to let the listener build some of the inner dynamic of the ordeal and give us some clues with Abraham and what he might be thinking, feeling, dealing with, because he's not dealing with it as truth and fact. He's kind of avoiding it and not wanting to deal with it. So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac, meaning loaded him up with it. And he himself carried the fire and the knife, and then the 2 of them walked on together. Now, as I said, this can't be a toddler. So the amount of the weight of the wood indicates that Isaac's at least 10, 12, 13, 14. he's got to be big enough to carry a load of wood a long distance in order for that image to work. And then this whole idea for 3 days carrying the fire. I'm wondering what kind of fire. Of course, maybe they rekindle the fire at night and cook and then go their way and have some way of keeping fire alive. Did I give anybody the assignment to look that up and find out how they do that? Oh, yeah? It doesn't say, so it's just up to our imagination. Yeah, maybe coals or something, but yeah, they could keep coals burning without a roaring fire. How
would they carry it without burning?
On a chain. You know, that may be the origin of the incense swinging. That whatever they were putting hickory sticks or something that gave some kind of an aroma, and then, oh, hey, let's put some other things in there. That smells good. We just invented the incense burner. We thought it was carrying the fire from place to place, but now it's an incense burner. Anyway, who knows? We'll have to explore that. So the two of them walked on together, and Isaac said to his father Abraham, "Father," and he said, "Here I am, son." And he said, "The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham said, "God himself will provide the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." So the two of them walked on together. Now, at that point, again, we're not sure if Abraham might be thinking and hoping that God will provide something other than his son, or if he's just trying to assuage his son's anxiety about something foreboding is about to happen here. But God himself will provide. So the two of them walked on together. And when they came to the place that God had shown him, Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order. And he bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Now, this part is kind of confusing if we want to really think about it. Now, how old was Abraham when Isaac was born? 100. And if Isaac is 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14, 113 or 14. And so Abraham is going to wrestle a 14 or 15-year-old and bind him and tie him up and then pick him up and lay him on an altar. It's kind of hard to conceive of that. Then Abraham reached out his hand, and he took the knife to kill his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." And God said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." So here again we've got that transposition between angel of the Lord and God himself. Angel of the Lord, where they don't really make it real consistent. It bounces back and forth. So Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in the thicket by its horns, and Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide," as it is said to this day, "On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." And then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven, and he said, "By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this, and you have not withheld your son, your only son, I will indeed bless you, and I'll make your offspring as numerous as the stars of the heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore, and your offspring shall possess the gate of their enemies. Now, possessing the gate of the enemies, the commentary says, is a very strange expression that's not found often, so we're not sure exactly where that comes from, but the Elohist who's writing this story somehow had picked that up from somewhere. And then, by your offspring shall all the nations of the earth gain blessing for themselves, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba. So there is that story complete. So what does all of that mean? Well, the binding of Abraham, or the testing of Abraham's faith, is often explained as a great transition in ancient religion. It says the change or a move from human sacrifice to animal sacrifice. But Nahum Sarna, the Jewish scholar of this little book that's really good, says there's lots of difficulties with that that is not really the main point of this. It may have some relationship somewhere along the line, and I'll get that a little later. But the narrative assumes human sacrifice is not only okay with God, but God commands human sacrifice. Just the way the story is laid out, it's just kind of matter of fact. And so for that to be in the story and treated matter-of-factly, rather than this is some horrible thing that God hates and this story is going to undo that, that's one of the problems he mentions. Another is, in the end, there is no categorical divine repudiation of the practice. There only this one case where the patriarch is being tested. The patriarch is a special person, therefore a special test, and not a general test of everybody. So that makes it unique and not some general thing that's meant to be applied to everybody. This is special case, special person, special event. So, but then in the text, Abraham is about to fulfill the command and slay Isaac for the sacrifice when the angel of the Lord calls out and says, don't touch him, for essentially you passed the test. You fear the Lord and were willing to offer your only son. Now, it's not the Lord as an angel like in Hagar who opens his eyes to see the ram. We don't have that, and God opened his eyes to see the ram. It just says he looked up and he saw it. And so we don't have that instrumentality of the God opened his eyes to see so that it would be God's intention to change something. So that emphasis isn't there. And then, let's see. And then Abraham decides to offer the ram instead of his son. It doesn't say the angel of the Lord doesn't tell him to substitute the ram instead of his son. He decides to do it. As far as God or the angel, you pass the test, it's done. But then it seems like Abraham, well, you asked me to come offer a sacrifice. I guess I better go offer a sacrifice. Here's a lamb. I'll offer a sacrifice. But as far as God was concerned, it was a test. You passed the test. Okay, you can go home now. Anyway, so the narrator missed this great opportunity to say and have the Lord say to Abraham, take the ram instead. I don't want human sacrifice or child sacrifice. I only want ram sacrifice. But those words aren't in the story. So that lessens, as far as at least the final message of this text, to be about that. It's got some other aspects. But Sarna has some other things about human sacrifice in the Middle East, that there was, and he lists several passages, Leviticus and Deuteronomy and Kings and 2 Kings and so forth, where in many places that the words in the Scripture are talking about the abomination of the pagans and their worship, the people around them, and particularly the Canaanites, that did actually sacrifice children, infants. And they have places where they have excavated and they have found the burnt remains of small children at the city gates and within the city around the shrines and the temples. So it was practiced, and so there is evidence that the Hebrew people did not like that, but to make such a big deal out of it, some may have been influenced by that and may have tried to do that. But in most cases, it wasn't a standard practice, but it would be an extreme practice. Like if you're under siege of an enemy and you want the God to be on your side, what can we do to make the God be on our side? Well, we'll offer the God our most precious thing. And so there may have been times when the Hebrew people, when they were under attack or duress, may have wanted to do that. And so that may be an element that's a part of the story. Then he also made a point that it was a shift from ritual of sacrifice, altar, and prayers, of this test of the faith, the demonstration of the faith, trust and obedience to God, and this whole idea of the fear of the Lord, where fear, and we talk about that, it's not supposed to be the fear and trembling that we're supposed to feel like God's going to strike us dead, like with lightning and thunder, or on on the mountain and the burning bush and so forth, that we're afraid for our life, but that fear in the sense of respect. We respect the power that is a power strong enough to destroy us, but it's also very much dealing with the understanding of, in this text, obedience. Fear of the Lord is equated with obedience, that you will obey. And I guess that expression would come from it's a lot of respect, but with the kings around and those folks who had absolute power, they give you an order, you obey. For fear of not obeying, then you are severely punished, executed, drawn and quartered, whatever. So obedience and fear kind of get connected, possibly that way, but then within the development of our faith through the years and into our Christian heritage, where we spend more time dealing with the love of God rather than the mean and capricious God, then fear we interpret more as respect. But it does have a little bit of basis of something real that we'd be afraid of, something bad happening. So when we get to that, we have all the stories that are in the Bible, particularly like these, have some didactic or teaching element. What is this story supposed to be teaching the people? It could have been, don't sacrifice your babies, but it has something more important because that has been de-emphasized the way the story worked out. And one of the big ones that Sarna points out is that faith in the Hebrew tradition is more than just intellectual assent. Faith is the obedience. It is the doing. You remember the Sabbath by doing and not doing things. You carry on your life by obeying what God has told us to do in the way we treat one another, the way we live our lives. So faith as doing. But it gets to a point of making a transition, and this is the big transition that Sarna points out, that it is more than just doing. And remember the prophets speaking for God, I hate your sacrifices and your bulls and gallons of oil and grain. What I want from you is justice. But at this level, it's not just the act, but even more importantly, the inward disposition. For I'm asking you to do this. You've shown your obedience, your willingness to. That's an inward disposition. That's a commitment level. How deep is that commitment level is the test. And so it's not just superficial acts, but a deep level of commitment of the inner spirit, of the heart. That you can be very obedient doing all the little mundane things and little sacrifices, but the deep, ultimate, really big one is the heart involved. Is it really there? Or will you sell me out? Is a thing. So another one is, and this is the big one that Sarna points out, is can you be obedient and do the right thing without the possibility of a reward? See, a lot of folks can do the right thing because you're going to be rewarded for it. Show up on time at work hard, get paid, maybe get a bonus, get a raise, get a promotion. What if you're in a dead-end job that doesn't pay well, and yet are you still going to do the job the best you can do? Because the nature of the job is serving other people, like nursing home staff or wait staff at some place where people don't usually give tips, McDonald's, da-da-da-da. Will you still be obedient, have the inner disposition, even though there's no big reward involved? And so if he's going to sacrifice Isaac's going to die. There's the promise of all the promises are connected with Isaac. And if he fulfills the command, then he just eliminates all the reward of obedience and faithfulness. That's a tough test. And that's the one that the Hebrew people are under a lot of times. But anyway, this story, since it doesn't have a very definite that, it has speaking right out of the mouth of God at the end of the story. So, Abraham, you kind of wondered why I made you do this. Well, let me explain the meaning of this test out of the mouth of God. It's not there. The meaning of the test isn't fully explained. So it leaves it for the people of God to hear this story, this very critical story of one of the great patriarchs, and we can talk about it and discuss it. And so it raises questions. So one of them is, what in the world could Abraham have been thinking and feeling when he first hears this, as he's going about the preparation, when Isaac asks him the question, when he explains to the two young men he takes along with him, and then tells them to stay there. And then, what could he be thinking? Well, the story is told in such a way that we can imagine all kinds of things, but it doesn't tell us. So anybody want to say what you imagine? It's almost unimaginable. And then the other part, Isaac. What in the world could he be thinking and feeling on the way to the point of ready for the sacrifice? And then when his dad is willing to do this, what could he be thinking then? And then, one of them that I kind of thought of, he could be thinking, okay, you're going to sacrifice me for a higher cause, for a greater good. Shake your head. But when we send our young people off to war, in many cases to be cannon fodder, are we sacrificing them to a greater good, and are we able to do that? And then how do we feel when it looks like that war was not necessary? So, but then could he be thinking, sometimes folks are able to do that and willing to accept that, to make a sacrifice for greater good. But usually it's for themselves, not somebody else. Of course, a lot of times folks would just be happy someone else go in their place. There are times where people could pay someone, you're supposed to serve. Well, if you don't want to do it, you can pay someone and they'll go serve your spot. Another, sacrifice me for selfish ambition and glory, because the promise is to make a great name of Abraham, and that you will be the father of many nations. It'll be through Isaac. But it's Abraham who's supposed to be getting all this glory. And then, are you sacrificing me in order to still be this virtue, this paragon of virtue and faithfulness? And if is that what Isaac might think? And then afterwards, as they're going back down, he could be thinking, you were willing to do that. Now, something traumatic like that does not leave the prior relationship the same. It changes. It changes it. So how was it changed, or how would it be changed? That's an issue. But do we sacrifice children today? Symbolically, metaphorically? You're nodding yes. You have something in mind?
I was trying to come up with an example, but
Okay. I scared the thought away, putting you on the spot. I'm sorry. But anyway, I think there are times that we do, that there are times when children are sacrificed in a way. There are times when some children are pushed so hard to be the little beauty queens. These little tiny toddlers in these beauty contests, because of the ambitions of the parent, the unfulfilled dreams. Young children in athletics sometimes are pushed too hard and too, just let them play and have fun. Oh no, you've got all this talent, you got to be a superstar so I can bask in glory because I'm the parent that produced this superstar. Sometimes the child emotionally is sacrificed, or their development as a normal person can be sacrificed for those things. And sometimes it can kind of be a sacrifice in the sense that time and the quality of the relationship and the family life gets sacrificed for the sake of success in the career. The career can be so demanding, and if you're going to, I know in some corporations, unless you are willing to travel and be gone bukus of hours and weekends and times, you're not going to get to move up the next level. The one who is willing to do that gets to move up, and they're very successful in the business. What's happening at home? What's happening at home? So there are sacrifices, if you will. Something gets sacrificed for the sake of something else. And so sometimes children are sacrificed that way for something else. There's a creative tension of sometimes the parent setting an example for a greater good can end up causing damage to loved ones. Sometimes not a great damage. When I was a few years ago teaching the course of study, we had folks who were second career people going into the ministry. Some of them were leaving lucrative positions. I don't know if I told you about this. One guy was a John Deere salesman. Anybody know where this is a few years ago, number one territory for John Deere tractor and implement sales in the world? Anybody got a guess? Belgium, number one territory. This salesman had gotten that territory. He had just been promoted to go be the guy, head sales guy in that territory. About the same time, his marriage and his family fell apart. And so, it caused deep, deep grief and self-examination, and through that process of getting the healing and working through that, he had a feeling of a calling to ministry. And so rather than go back to school and seminary, he was going to do the course of study. And in order to be that good a salesman, he was a very talented and very expressive person. And he could make a good preacher, pastor. And then there's another guy who was there at the same time who had been superintendent of schools in Salina, Kansas. He had a PhD. Now, he had his life didn't fall apart, but he was had just gotten to the point he was tired of all the school board stuff and dealing a little bit with the craziness of some of the ultra conservatives in Kansas trying to mess with the school system. And he had been very active in the church. Had been, chairman of the board, missions, maybe pastor parish, all kinds of things. He was a very talented guy and educated, and he felt, okay, he could retire from that, draw some pension, go get some education, and take a church, be a preacher. And he was very talented. And then there was another guy who was there who had been kind of like a Hell's Angels guy, a motorcycle guy who had dyslexia and didn't graduate from high school and had all kinds of troubles and just hated himself, hated the world, and he went into a storefront little church and sat down intending to wait for just the right moment to start a fight and tear the place up. Well, he kept sitting and waiting, and while he was sitting and waiting, something touched his heart. And so he started working there, and then he wanted to, after a while, wanted to get some education and try to be a minister to people like himself. in these kind of storefront churches. So, but anyway, that's the different people who sometimes make a career change that is very noble and good, but it would have a great reduction in income and salary for the family. And sometimes the children feel like they're being sacrificed because daddy's had a lucrative job and they had big plans of nice car and nice college and all paid for because daddy made so much money, and now he's throwing it all away to go into the ministry, and now we're going to be poor and we're not going to have that stuff. You're sacrificing my future for your plans. So it creates some real struggles, but that question going on there. So there are some times when some folks will, for a greater good, who may be foreign missionaries, and they feel called to do that. Yet they're married, they have children, and so they go to these places that are kind of dangerous. And then their children are at risk because the medical facilities aren't very good. And if the child gets sick, has appendicitis, needs emergency surgery, there's no surgeon, there's no hospital, and sometimes there are deaths. Sometimes there's violence. Whenever the church goes in someplace and tries to make things better, it upsets the power structure in that area, and somebody doesn't like that. And they want to stop it. And so how do you stop it? Well, you stop the people who are causing it. And that's why missionaries get killed. And sometimes when they get killed, the adults might not get killed, but, members of the family get caught up in something and they die. So there are times when sacrifice happens when someone is responding to a higher calling. And then the question is, are we willing to answer those kinds of calls if the risks are too high? Well, what is too high? So Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac isn't just meant to be a literal thing that is only for one person and one little test. This story gets bounced off of with all kinds of faith questions, issues. What is God calling me to do? Is God really calling me to do this? Or is this just my own ambition, my hope for glory? Or I've messed up so badly, I want to overcome, sort of like the martyrs. I've been such a sinful person. If I give my life, then it wipes away all the sins I've committed in the past. Well, if I do this big sacrifice, then all my messed up early life is cleansed. I mean, there's all kinds of thoughts and feelings that go into these kind of decisions. So that's what the story pushes us to do. For the Jewish people and Christians later, we have real life situations when to remain faithful and obedient to the ways of God, to our worship, to our lifestyle, there are times when in our ministry and in our service, it sometimes puts us in harm's way, that we become the objects of persecution if we remain faithful. I mean, early times when pastors stepped out in faith to do what they felt was right in terms of integration. Actually, it's Richard Hedger, who's now a member of our church. I followed Richard at Spencer, Oklahoma, and Richard experienced this. Spencer was integrating the old Dungee High School and Star Spencer High School, and there was a lot of conflict because that area of Oklahoma City is real blue collar, and there's a lot of prejudice in that community. And there was, Richard have to give us the detail, but there was a black family had moved into the area of Spencer. The father of the family had a PhD. They were educated. They were, middle-class folks. He visited them, invited them to church, created a huge stink. Now, he could have known that was going to happen, knowing the climate of the community, and he said, I don't want to risk it. It's going to cause me trouble. I just let things ride. Or I can be obedient to my calling. I can do what is right, and it's going to hurt my family. There are times when folks have to make a stand on principle for what is right, but then the consequence comes way, way more powerful than you'd even thought or dreamed. You can think, oh my gosh, have I stirred up a hornet's nest or opened the floodgates? And you can just cower and say, I'm sorry, I won't do that again. Or say, this is a matter of principle. This is what the gospel calls us to do. This is what is right. And so there are those things. And then it hurts your family. Because when they're mad at you, a lot of times, and they don't have the courage to talk to you and face you directly, they come around behind you and they get your family and they hurt your family as a way to get at you. Speak from experience. It happens. So you're dealt with this issue like Abraham. God is calling me to do this thing and it seems so hard and so it doesn't make sense. If you want the church to grow, you keep everybody happy. Don't do something that's going to stir up a controversy. Well, the issue is out there. We have a choice to do the right thing or just to not do the right thing. It may have consequences. Oops. Our time's almost up. Oh, Vaughter in his book had, back to the child sacrifice, he said, somewhere very ancient time, there was this ancient spiritual sage who probably came to a realization that God preferred obedience over sacrifices of animals and people, and that the human sacrifice was not acceptable at all. But then animal sacrifice did continue because it was a thank offering, and it was very often a communal meal shared among the folks, understanding in the presence of God, and the lesser blessed would get some of the blessing of the sacrifice. There would be some protein in their meal, in their diet, and it would make them healthier, and everything was better in the community, and God was given the thanks and the recognition for providing all of the blessings, the harvest, the crop, the world, the good spirit in the community, all of these good things that the sacrificial meal of the animal sacrifice did provide. It wasn't just all burned up and wasted. So, any other questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Yes. Are you familiar with any place in the Bible where sacrifice is requested by God?
Well, there's different rules. Yeah, all the ways of how we're supposed to sacrifice, but it's the priestly work in the temple and what kind of sacrifices are for thank offerings and sin offerings and all of that. That's implied that was God's will. But again, in Leslie Weatherhead's idea, there's the intentional will of God in the beginning, and then the circumstantial will given the context of today, and then there's the ultimate will of God, when we work through all the circumstantial wills. So I think animal sacrifices is in that middle of the circumstantial, given the cultural, political, economic setting, that if people are going to offer sacrifices or thank offerings or worship God, that sometimes animal sacrifice is the best answer in that circumstance. But that ultimately God wants us to move past that to other ways of being obedient.
Stay here with the donkey.
Yeah.
And we will go and worship, and then we will come back to you. He doesn't
Right.
use the word we, like he knows we're coming back. Or
Either knows or he doesn't want to get them upset.
okay, I can understand that.
Yeah, it's ambiguous. He may be wishful thinking, we're coming back, or then again it might be, I don't want to tell you the truth.
What about just the statement that he makes, God will provide?
That he may have be thinking, God has already provided. He gave me my son. My son is the sacrifice. God has provided, will provide, and it may be located there. But then again, it can be wishful thinking. God will provide a lamb. I'm not going to have to do this. But if that's the case, there's no anguish. There's no struggle. God isn't really asking me to do this. It's not a real test. If we take that,
It's a demonstration of his faith.
well, if Isaac's not really life threatened, if it's not a real threat, then it's not a real test. That's the argument against what you're suggesting. Yes.
What bothers me about this story is when God said to Abraham, my son, my only son. He had another son. Why does it say that?
Because in the storyline, we've already gotten rid of Ishmael. He's gone away. So this is what's left, and it's just part of the narrative to make us struggle and wonder what's going on. Part of it is just the good storytelling part with lots of intrigue. But then through that intrigue, these big questions and issues that come out, like that interior disposition of the heart. And what are you really willing to give? Just superficial things? Are you willing to give the best, your most cherished? Are you willing to give that to me for my purposes? Now, for my purposes, it isn't going to be dying, but to let Him be my instrument moving on. So anyway, all those questions. It's time to go. May the Lord bless you and keep you and bring you back next time. Okay.
So.